How far can we trust the word of a pro player? Are they beings of unlimited wisdom when it comes to one of our favorite pastimes that includes yelling at each other in the competitive game mode for a children's shooter? Pro players in the Overwatch competitive scene have their fair share of blame to take for a heck of a lot of things when it comes to spreading misinformation, and not to mention hypocrisy. As an average player, many feel drawn to pro players who share their knowledge during live streams, and much of that advice is very well appreciated. But should we blindly believe every word they say, especially given their track record in recent memory? I think most people would answer with a confident no, and that probably for good reason. Pro players are just people like you and I. They are not developers and thus do not hold any more knowledge when it comes to certain aspects of the game. There is, however, a line we have to draw eventually. A recent post on the Overwatch forums called "Being pro does not mean they know more about the game" has really been taking this concept to the extreme. And that, well, much to the detriment of common sense and a healthy level of self-awareness. I want to spare you the details of the post itself and subsequently thoughtless yay-sayers who agree with the notion, but the basic gist was that some people are under the impression that having pro players give their input on balancing decisions would not be that great of an idea. The post is driven by the notion that Blizzard will be listening to these pro players first and foremost rather than the bulk of the community. I always feel relatively amused when reading things like that because the latter players accuse the devs of only listening to the casuals, but then the casuals claim they only listen to pro players. Furthermore, it seemed like the OP was under the impression that either none or not enough low-ranked players are among the opinions that Blizzard would consult before making balancing decisions. Honestly, I think the core of the issue is that they listen to all of us. They try to appeal to every player in the game, and by that end up satisfying nobody because the balance turns out to be a huge mess as a result. Furthermore, pretending that the only differentiating factor between pros and low elo players will be mechanics along the lines of response time, aiming, and tracking ability is probably the biggest meme I heard all week. Comments on the said post continue this nonsense, bring up examples such as somebody being really fast at typing, but that doesn't mean that they know how to manufacture a keyboard. Boy, the things we have to deal with here. In order to go anywhere in this discussion, we have to clarify what kind of expertise or knowledge is required, because if we're talking about the keyboard example, then neither the low elo pleb nor the pro player would know jack shit about it. A developer would. Fact of the matter is that your average pro player knows right about everything that could be relevant to you as a player. That means yes, they know the game inside out when it comes to the 1% plays, making the most out of your resources, adapting strategies, and so on. They are inherently more knowledgeable than most ladder players, no matter the elo. If knowing the game's function refers to anything relating to the systems supporting the actual gameplay experience rather than being directly tied to the gameplay itself, then we're all on a level playing field. Because all we can know is what the developers share with us, which is public knowledge. The rest is speculation. Going further down this rabbit hole, we see comments contradicting each other, where some agree that pro players are merely mechanically better and then try to push the narrative of Overwatch being a knowledge-driven game. And that is not entirely inaccurate. Yes, Overwatch is not all mechanics. A mechanically inferior team can still come out on top by applying their skills more smartly and outplaying the opposition through superior knowledge and adaptation. But this is obviously what is required of pro players to be able to showcase the highest level of play during tournaments. You can't just claim that the game is not solely mechanically driven and then make the point that all a pro player can do better than you is providing these mechanics that you just said are not as important. Claiming that low elo players know the game better than professionals who literally spend thousands of hours of their lives playing the game is absolutely ridiculous, no matter how you try to look at it. What all of this is boiling down to again is the type of information that is required, which again has not really been specified, because there are certain situations in which what has been proposed by the OP can be accurate to a certain extent. Again, pro players are not developers, thus they don't know any more about the technicalities surrounding the game than anyone who has been watching the developer updates and actively is reading up on news. When it comes to advice for gameplay improvement, that again could be accurate, because pro players spend most of their time playing the game, well, for all intents and purposes, properly. There are no one-tricks in pro play, there are no throwers, and there's no random guy that decides to be toxic out of the blue. The problem in Overwatch is that the pro scene is an entity that exists outside the game itself, as it is available to us regular players, and that is where the big disparity is coming from. Ladder players are not playing the game properly because the game itself never gives us any reasons to do so. elo. All we do is try to make work what we get from the system, and this is why advice from pro players is not always all that helpful for your average ladder player. And the same can be said for high elo players and streamers. Those will be, again, players who spend a lot of time in the game, thus they probably know a thing or two, but every player in this game is mostly concerned with their most immediate problems. You can't even necessarily say that getting advice of someone who's playing in your elo is always helpful, because our experiences vary so dramatically going from player to player, because the competitive experience is so goddamn inconsistent. A top 500 soldier main is probably gonna give you a different piece of advice than a top 500 flex player. There is no right way to play in our current environment. I mean, there technically is if you want to be pedantic about it, but it has no connection to the reality we're facing whatsoever. You will never be able to apply a rulebook to the competitive ladder in its current state, because it's pretty much the Wild West with everyone doing whatever they want anyway. Until we get restrictions and gating tools introduced into competitive play, all advice you get is gonna be relative anyway. And you have to cherry pick if whatever they are telling you is gonna be relevant to you and your unique gameplay experience. All I'm really trying to say is that it's not a bad idea to ask people for advice who spend a lot of time in the game, but you should not blindly follow it. Question their logic and find out which bits of advice from a variety of streamers, pro players, and high elo friends is gonna be relevant to you personally. Yes, a pro player is not gonna be able to tell you any more about how SR distribution works than any other random guy on the forum who decides to speculate based on their experience. But that doesn't mean that their expertise is not relevant to the balance of the game, because eventually the developers should be striving for a time where pro play is no longer disconnected from competitive play in a way that you could almost call them two entirely different games. A time where, to a certain extent, things we see happen in pro play could happen to us on ladder as well, albeit nowhere near as coordinated. And don't forget that the success of Overwatch as an esport is important to us as players as well. It makes sure that the game will see further support for many years to come. So bottom line is that no, a low elo player will never know more about the game than your average pro player, because if they did know how to apply their knowledge, they would not be low elo players. Professional players do inherently know more about the game from a gameplay perspective than most ladder players do. But when it comes to advice for your own gameplay, do keep in mind that pro play and ladder play are two entirely different environments. That means that no matter where you get your tips from, make sure it's not just a single source, and be picky about what you feel you can adapt for your own gameplay. But this is me done for the day. I talk about, well, I mean, pro players and advice, I guess. Well, if you want to discuss anything mentioned in today's video, feel free to do so down in the comment section below. But until then, thank you everybody so much for watching. Don't forget to drop me a like on your way out if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to see more, and I hope to see you all next time.